Chapter 22, Gravity, from Jesus, a Novel. The wheels left the tarmac and the plane banked right over Lindbergh Terminal, heading for Dulles International in Washington, D.C. James and John were sitting 2 rows ahead of me. Peter and Susie were behind them. Maddie and I behind them. Jesus was across the aisle next to a chatty lady in jeweled glasses who was thanking her lucky stars to be seated next to the Minneapolis Messiah. "The girls at book club will never believe this," she giggled. "Jesus, God, I'm sitting next to Jesus. Do you know what my horoscope said this morning? Today you will meet a celebrity. And here you are." She turned to face the person directly behind her and said, much louder than necessary, "This is Jesus. Can you believe he's on our flight?" The flight attendants were serving the first round of drinks. The news of Jesus' presence traveled much more quickly than the condiment carts. It rippled down the seat-belted aisles, around the bulkhead, to the guy sliding the no vacancy sign on the rear restroom. The days since the demonstration had been a blur. Maddie had been at my apartment waiting for me on the night of the big march. She knew I would need to be put back together again. She knew me. She stayed the night and we talked till 4 when she had to leave for the governor's place. Jesus, to Judas' surprise, had actually given an interview yesterday on SMN. He challenged Baal and the state on the death of the boy and reminded them of the injustice carried out on Father John. If it's peace you want, you need to demonstrate your desire to live in peace with all people, including slaves. And peace is not achieved by control. You can't control behavior through force. But peace is when people willfully choose to live in harmony. And that only happens when justice and respect trickle down. Try that and you'll see respect trickle up. That harmony is absent in our culture, President Chatsworth. Jesus now looks straight into the camera. You and Congress need to reimagine a way forward that honors the sanctity of all. Then with a slight smile on his face, he said, "I have some ideas for you, Mr. President." One reporter shot back, "Ideas? Can you share them with us? What would they look like, Jesus?" Jesus thought for a second, then said, "It's really quite simple. Love the Creator and love your brothers as yourself. And by the way, we are all brothers." With that, he turned and left. It turns out that the president had watched the press conference and had asked for a meeting with Jesus and Sebastian immediately. His presidency was a bit shaky. Various religious groups were flexing their muscle. The government-run system of slavery, the Brotherhood of the Yoked, was always experiencing push and pull, a tug of war the president didn't need right now. And none of that included the brewing troubles around the world. If at all possible, the president was looking to keep the peace, especially at home. So he arranged a meeting, hoping to curtail any conflict that might find itself to be newsworthy. Judas was in business class, having paid for the upgrade. He was on his second glass of complimentary wine, nibbling on some cheese, with his tie tucked into his shirt for protection. He was chatting with a priest of Baal, who was sitting next to him. "Yeah, I'm Jesus' business manager. I handle all of his speaking engagements and events." He and the priest were having a very cordial conversation. The remainder of the first-class cabin was populated by robes, a coterie of Baal priests. Sebastian sat in 1B, his robe spilling over the armrest into the aisle. At first, he had requested to fly on a different plane than Jesus and his tribe, but the president insisted they fly together, orchestrating a forced congeniality in the air. The chatty lady, who we found out without asking, was Emma Stonewalder at your service. She had connections to a local book publisher and had already offered to serve as Jesus' literary agent, assuring him she could get him a deal in 2 shakes of a martini. Jesus patiently listened to Emma ramble, even after he told her he had no intentions of writing a book. I could tell it burned Pete and the Sons of Thunder that Sebastian and his flock were up front. Not that Peter and the boys wanted to be there, but just the fact that the priest always had to make sure everyone knew they were the elite, the favored ones. There was a small part of me that feared there would be a full-scale throwdown at 30,000 feet. Even though the flight attendants had requested that passengers remain in their seats, a young woman carrying a baby approached Jesus. She stood there for a bit, waiting for Emma to stop talking before she said nervously, "Jesus, I know who you are and what you have been doing. I have seen that you heal people of illnesses and stuff." She cleared her throat. "My little girl was born with a deformed hand, and I was just wondering if there was anything you could do to make it normal." Emma jumped in. "Oh, honey, that's not," without looking in her direction. Jesus held up his hand to silence her, then said, "What's her name?" "Caroline." "Pretty name. She's beautiful." The young woman smiled. "Would it be okay if I held her?" Without hesitation, she handed baby Caroline to Jesus. Jesus held her admiringly, then simply asked, "Do you believe I can heal her?" The young woman nodded, her chin quivering just a touch. The baby was wrapped in a blanket and sleeping, so her hand was not visible. Jesus made no move to uncover it or look at it. He seemed taken by the simple beauty of the innocent face. Then he said something very strange to the woman. "I understand your desire to have your daughter's hand restored. Every parent would wish for the same thing. But her beauty is not diminished by her lack of a fully functioning hand. Imperfections are the foundation of my Father's masterpieces. She is his treasured workmanship, a one-of-a-kind, original work of art." He continued, "When one hand is restricted, it opens the door for greater beauty to flow from the other. That hand has the unique power to open wide the windows of compassion that would otherwise remain latched, not only for her, but for you. What seems deficient may be the doorway to abundance. What appears constraining, freedom." He was quiet for a bit. Then, while looking into the sleeping face of Caroline, he said, "These decisions are much more complicated than they appear." Jesus looked up at the young mother, silently searching her eyes for the answer to a horribly complex question. Then he kissed Caroline on her forehead and handed her back to her mother. She looked at Jesus as if to say, "Did anything happen? Did you heal her?" She thanked Jesus and turned to walk back to her seat. But she had to look. She had to. As she unwrapped the arm, then the hand, a slight sob escaped her lips. Judas looked up to see Sebastian standing in the aisle beside him. Sebastian uncorked a broad smile for Judas, then nodded at the priest sitting beside Judas. The priest jumped up on cue and went to Sebastian's seat. "Mind if I join you?" he asked unpretentiously. "Not at all," responded Judas, motioning toward the empty seat, a touch flattered that the high priest of Baal would choose to sit with him. Sebastian slid into the first-class accommodations and made a slight flick of the wrist to the flight attendant. She hurried over. "Could you open the bottle I brought along? The Domaine Romane, Montranche, Grange Cru?" She was turning to leave when Sebastian added, "And bring a glass for my friend here." He turned back to Judas and extended his hand. "Sebastian Gontrafo, and you are Judas, one of the tribe of Jesus." Judas nodded a bit uncomfortably. Sebastian had done his due diligence and extensive profile prepared on each member of the tribe. "You must be the lone cultured tribe member," he said as he cast a superior nod toward the coach class cabin. You're the one that doesn't quite fit the profile of his bourgeois crew. Tell me, Judas, how does a man of your standing find esprit de corps in the ranks of such average men?" Then he quickly added, "Average men and a slave." Judas hurriedly dropped his right hand onto his lap, hiding the number on his hand. Sebastian's number, the one he had gotten at the parking ramp, was gone. He must have had it removed via laser. Judas began to answer the question, but Sebastian's attention was plucked by the pop of a cork. Within seconds, 2 glasses of the precious liquid and the bottle were delivered on a tray. The glasses bore the initials SDG. Sebastian took the glasses, handing one to Judas. He raised his glass in a toast and said, "To the power of wealth and the wealth of power." He clinked his glass with that of Judas, took a long, slow sip, and swished it around in his mouth. Judas' knowledge of wines wasn't extensive, but he knew this bottle was somewhere north of $1,000. His hand shook slightly as he brought $250 worth of rare grapes to his lips. Even though he had too little experience to truly appreciate the difference between $100 and a $1,000 Chardonnay, there was something intoxicating about sipping wealth at 30,000 feet. Sebastian looked at Judas, waiting for a reaction to the first taste. Searching for an appropriately sophisticated response, Judas said, "Exquisite." "My thoughts exactly," said Sebastian. Then changing the subject, moving toward his agenda. "Here's what I don't get," he began. "A man of Jesus' extraordinary talents and power, and he squanders them on trivial things, trivial people. Do you realize, Judas, the potential to monetize the hell out of that man?" Sebastian was speaking Judas' language now. These were the same thoughts that had been driving him crazy. Judas jumped in. "And just think of the good that could be done with all that money. Good for the sake of the poor and underprivileged." To a certain degree, Judas meant what he said. "I couldn't agree more," affirmed Sebastian. Judas didn't trust Sebastian, nor did he particularly like him. But at least here was a man who understood the potential of an opportunity like Jesus. These types of prospects don't come along every day, and when they do, you need to optimize them and milk them for all they're worth. It's not selfishness or greed, it's just good business. "Why is it," asked Sebastian, "that Jesus doesn't understand this? It seems so simple and so logical to people like us, Judas." Sebastian looked at Judas, his new best friend, waiting for a response. Coach class was quickly becoming a circus. The aisles were jammed with people trying to get at Jesus. People with cancer, glaucoma, or hangnails. Curiosity seekers, autograph hounds, and celebrity chasers. Photos of the airborne phenom were being uploaded, raining down on terra firma, scorching social media channels with miracle in the sky stories. Meanwhile, a quagmire on Concourse C was developing at Dulles Airport as people began claiming carpet space in front of the Messiah's arrival gate. The flight attendants were losing control, pleading with people to remain in their seats. At one point, they announced, "We are about to experience some significant turbulence. It is imperative that everyone return to their seats." As near as I could tell, the pilot manufactured the turbulence with some spastic aileron action. It wasn't very convincing. Minutes later, mayhem again reigned in the center aisle. Sebastian poured another glass for Judas. It was obvious that there was a scene unraveling in coach class, but what concern was that of those segregated by wealth? "I wonder," posed Sebastian as if searching for solutions, "if Jesus needs some assistance, a nudge, a helping hand from someone like you." Judas had been thinking about this for a while. In his mind, the movement's primary problem was poor management. It lacked for direction. It had gone viral. But what are a million hits if there is no apparent momentum toward something measurable? Judas was convinced, given the opportunity, he could parlay the Messiah and his notoriety into a bulging bankroll, not to mention a power play that could even gain the upper hand over the likes of Sebastian. Judas wasn't naive. He suspected that Sebastian was trying to use him. He knew that Baal had no love for Jesus and would be more than happy to see him fade, or worse. But by now, Judas had witnessed hundreds of miracles, not tricks, not illusions. What Jesus could do, no one had ever done. There was no doubt in Judas' mind that if Jesus wanted to, he could squash Sebastian with a word. No, the problem wasn't that Jesus didn't have enough power. It was that he was reticent to use it in ways that mattered. Maybe, just maybe, thought Judas, if Jesus was backed into a corner, he would have no options but to exercise his power to protect himself. Maybe if I created a scenario that forced his hand, it would be the very thing that would jumpstart the Jesus movement. Maybe Jesus truly does need a nudge, and maybe I'm the one to deliver it. Sebastian could see that the wheels were turning in Judas' mind. What are you thinking, my friend? Judas hadn't fully thought this through, but he had some ideas. He wasn't ready to show Sebastian all of his cards just yet, but this friendship he was forging with the high priest was showing promise, the kind of promise that might just bring Jesus to his rightful place of power over everyone, including this pompous bastard. I think you may be right, Sebastian. We need to force his hand. Judas now playing to Sebastian. I mean, either he's a fraud or he's the real deal. But we'll never know either way if he just continues to play the role of Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, meandering through life, shaking hands and kissing babies. Maybe we isolate him on a narrow road. We take away his turn lanes so he has to prove himself. A knowing grin developed on Sebastian's face. I like the way you think, Judas. He saves others, but can he save himself? Will he? Sebastian now playing to Judas. And you're right, Judas. He claims to be the Son of God. If he proves himself to be just that, well then, I'm ready to worship him. I'll gladly bow at his feet. But if he is just playing us for fools, then he should be found out. They clinked their glasses, sealing an unspoken pact. The plane's PA system clicked on and the lead flight attendant said, well, this is going to be a first. We are going to have Jesus tell you all a story. So please, everyone take your seats and listen to what Jesus has to say. This maneuver was not listed on page 23 of the flight attendant manual, but was a last-ditch effort to manage the chaos. Nothing else had worked, so Jesus had offered to the lead flight attendant that maybe he could talk to everyone, sort of calm them down with a story. Everything else had been tried, so she immediately agreed. Jesus began. Orville and Wilbur were a couple of lawbreakers. Interesting start, I thought. Oh, they weren't the first to break Sir Isaac Newton's famous law. The birds, those delinquents, have been flagrantly defying gravity since, well, for a very long time. He paused, then asked, how many of you on this plane today are afraid of flying? Scattered hands went up. You should be, he said, because it's not natural. There are natural laws, things we can count on. They're consistent, repeatable, dependable. What goes up must come down. When apples fall, they hit us on the head. We, you and me, we're subject to the laws of gravity. It has power over us. We have to obey it. It does not give us a choice. Airplanes, on the other hand, have found a loophole in the law, or rather, a corollary, the law of aerodynamics. And this law, when properly applied, cancels out the other. Now, if you will all look out your windows, you will notice that you, at this very moment, are defying the law of gravity. You're flying. Well, not exactly. The plane is, but since you are in the plane, you, by extension, are flying. Let's just say that one of you started thinking, I'm 30,000 feet in the air. Maybe I can fly. Maybe the law of gravity no longer applies to me. Look at me, I'm a bird. So you go over to the door, hit the release, open the door, and jump out. Now what? Are you still flying? Not for long. No, you can't fly. You never could. And you are now and always will be subject to the law of gravity. But when you stepped into this plane at gate 22F, you made a statement of faith. You said, I believe this plane can fly. And as long as I'm inside of it, the law of aerodynamics will set me free from the law of gravity. So you chose to place your trust in a higher law where gravity has no pull. What exactly are you saying, Jesus? It was Maddie, always the curious, interrupting. She gave me a look that said, well, somebody had to ask. I felt the plane start its descent. My ears popped as Jesus slowly weighed his words. There's a gravity to life. It has a natural tendency to pull you down. Your very nature has a bias for sea level. Occasionally you rise above your nature through sheer discipline and effort, but it's temporary. Even the loftiest of intentions, the most well-harnessed willpower, are subject to gravity. There are days when we look to the heavens and suspect we are made for more than this. The sky beckons us, but against a nature inclined toward descent, we can't pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We may long for heaven, but our feet are locked to earth, chained, choked, owned. Jesus now let the microphone hang at his side for a moment. The packed plane waited for his conclusion. Finally, he spoke. I am immune to your laws of nature. I am not from here, but have temporarily set aside my divine aerodynamics and allowed gravity to bring me to you. I have seen your predicament. I have cried in sorrow to see how you have been enslaved. My father and I could no longer stand it. I have come to be your airplane, your way out, your way up. The only hope you have of escaping your nature, the darkness that pulls you downward, is by coming on board, putting your trust in me, the one who alone can overcome the law and set you free. Sebastian and Judas had heard every word. The first-class section squirmed and fumed, uncomfortable in their oversized seats. The bottle in Sebastian's hand was raised, itself threatening to defy gravity, but Sebastian restrained his arm and set it back down. He leaned over to Judas and with a terse whisper said, "Let's not wait too long to implement our plan." The plane was silent. A third of those on board had been healed of something significant or other in the past 2 hours. There were still doubters and those confused by him. But by the time our wheels touched down, Jesus was surrounded by another cloud of witnesses.